Literary history. Now, since most common people couldn't read and write, so they continued to share stories through spoken words. Common people, they couldn't read and write, so they share stories through words. Verbal tradition were there. One popular form was the folk ballad, short narrative poems set to music. Now, another development that during the late Middle Ages, not early, late Middle Ages, religious plays became popular. So there were mystery and miracle plays and acted out stories from the Bible. So these mystery and miracle plays consist of stories were taken from the Bible, okay, and then they would be performed on the stage. And the lives of the saints. So there was story from the Bible, right? And the story of the lives of the saint, and these story became miracle and mystery stories, while morality plays taught moral lesson. So these kind of stories were performed on the stage, right? Who? By these religious people, by the priests, by the monk, by the friars, by the prioress, these people. So mystery and miracle plays acted out stories from the Bible. These stories were taken from the Bible and the lives of the saint, okay, people, while morality plays taught moral lesson to the people. So these simple performances meant to teach religious ideas to largely illiterate audience. This is very interesting. Morality and these stories, okay, they were taught through performance. And these stages were not somewhere like outside of the church, but these stories would be performed inside the churches, not outside the churches, right? Inside the churches by religious people to illiterate audience. Though these illiterate audience would come to the church, and in the church these stories would be told to them or would be performed in a simple manner, not like something like a large stage in Shakespearean age, which became later on. We're talking about Middle Ages. There was not proper stage, but these stories would be taught, okay, would be told, or would be performed with act inside the church by these religious people to illiterate audience, eventually grow into the rich tradition of English drama later on. Now, another very interesting man, King John's. King John's costly wars left England nearly bankrupt. We're talking about King John, who was the son of Henry II. So after the death of Henry II, because Richard Lyon already died, so he became the King of England. So he made England bankrupt. In 1215, he was forced to sign the Magna Carta, a document that limited the king's power and gave more authority to the barons, lesser nobles, an important early step towards democracy. So it was this Magna Carta, it was a document, a charter between the king and the baron. It was like a stepway, a doorway, or a step towards democracy, the beginning of 13th century. Remember. Now, during the reign of his son Henry III. So Henry III was the son of King John's. Baron formed a council. Okay, these baron, they form a council later called Parliament, which met regularly. You see, first that was Magna Carta. There was like a council, and then in Henry II, this council got the name of Parliament, which met regularly to discuss the affairs of the state or the government. Under Edward I, the model Parliament of 1295, end of 13th century, was created. So there was a model Parliament in the time of Edward I was created, and allowing common people who later formed the House of Commons. Still we have House of Commons in England, right? So House of Commons had origin where? in the model parliament in 1295, which allowed common people to participate and to meet this council. And this later formed the House of Commons and to join the baron, which were lesser noble, which became the House of Lords in government. Still, we have House of Lords in England. So, House of Lords, that is like upper house, right, and consists of the lords. And then we have lower house, that is called common, House of Common, and it consists of the common people who contest election, and they come and they form government, right? So the House of Lord and the House of Common had origin in model parliament in 1295. Now the decline of feudalism. As trade increased, medieval town grew, right? Because of the trade, medieval town grew and boosting the power of common people. Common people got some power, and the crusade played a role in this economic expense because people need money. They had to produce a lot of product. So in these towns, merchants and craftspeople form guild, or we can say that guilds, and this is called organization that control prices and regulated trades and set rules for the training apprentices to become master craftsmen. So you see a lot of happenings are happening in this Middle Ages. As town grew and became trade center, feudalism declined because wealth was no longer based only on land. Now, if you did not have land, it doesn't mean that you were poor. You could do anything else to become rich. So people were not depending on the land only. So feudalism declined because wealth was no longer based only on land. However, crowded towns with poor sanitation led to the rapid spread of diseases like the plague. We can see a lot of plagues were there because there was a poor sanitation system in England and in Europe. So meanwhile, universities became important center of learning. Before that, the center was the church. The church was the center of the art, of the literature, of the learning. Now university became the center of learning. At Oxford, scholars like Rogers, Bacon advanced science and mathematics in the 13th century. In the 14th century, John Wycliffe spoke out against corruptions in the church, inspiring later reforms like Martin Luther King. So the first man was John Wycliffe, who spoke out that the church is corrupt. They're corrupt practices in the church. He spoke against the church, and later it gave words to the another philosopher, German philosopher. His name was Martin Luther King. He nailed 95 things which were wrong in Roman Catholic Church, and he nailed it at the door of Witteman's, the church in German. He nailed at the door, okay, Wittemensburg, and then people would read and they would come and they will learn what's wrong with the church. Literary history, Middle Ages. Religion played a major role in medieval English life and literature. One famous poem from this period, that was Piers Plowman, explored the Christian spiritual themes through a dream version. Another important work, that was the book of Margaret Came, is an autobiography focused on the author's religious experience. In contrast, the Postons, later written between 1420 and 1500, provide a glimpse into the everyday medieval life. This is the literary history of the time. And then we can see the spread of the idea was helped by the invention of the printing press in the 15th century. We can see that there was the invention of the printing press, and they spread ideas, information. So during the Middle Ages, romance stories about chivalry knights became very popular, especially tales about King Arthur. So because there was no printing press, and these ideas spread among the common people. So the Arthurian's legends, originally passed down by the Welsh poets, written down in Latins by Geoffrey of Monmouth in 1135. His work inspired French, Germans, and English writers to adopt these stories with a focus on chivalry. One famous Arthurian story, Sir Gawain's and the Green Knights, was written around 1375. Later in the 15th century, Sir Thomas Morley compiled Le Morte d'Arthurs, or Middle English versions of the Arthurian's tales. Now, a very important event is also here, the Hundred Years' War between France and England. Even this war was not continued for 100 years. There were some breaks also in this 100 years. So, John Wycliffe's reforms effort happens during the 100-year war. So, his reforms regarding John Wycliffe reforms effort happened during the 100 Years' War. It happened during the 100-year wars. It was a long conflict between England and France that began in 1337 under Edward III. So the war lasted over a century with the breaks in between. During these times, England also faced major internal conflicts, including the deadly Black Death plague. So there was a Black Death also during this 100-year wars, which wiped out a third of the population. One third of the population was wiped out by this Black Death. So the peasants' revolt also occurred during this 100 Years' War, 1381, and the forced removals of the King Richard II in 1399, which put Henry IV on the throne. So these all happened during the 100 Years' War, right? Now, the war had many famous moments such as the Henry V victory at the Agnicourt and the French lifting the siege of the Orleans under John of Arc leadership. Also happened during 100 Years' War. When the war ended in 1453, England had lost nearly all its French territories. In 100 Years' War, the French territory which are owned by the England, they lost, and was on the brink of another conflict, the Wars of the Roses. So there was another war after 1453 at the end of 100-year war. This was called Wars of Roses. This was the war between two families over the power or the throne of England. So this was a battle for the England throne between the two rival families, the House of the York, symbolized by the white rose, and the House of the Lancaster, symbolized by the red rose. The struggle ended in 1485 when Henry Tudor, a Lancastrian, defeated Richard III at the Battle of the Bosworth Field. Henry became King Henry VII, an event that is often seen the end of the Middle Ages in England. So 1485, the end of the Middle Ages, with the defeat of who? Where is that? Richard III, and Henry VII becomes the King of England. Is the end of the Middle Ages. Literary history, the revival of English as a literary language was led by Geoffrey Chaucer, the most important writer of the 14th century Middle English. His greatest work, The Canterbury Tales, is a collection of stories told by a group of pilgrims traveling from London to Canterbury to visit the shrine of Thomas à Becket, who was like a saint, murdered by Henry II. So these pilgrims come from all parts of the medieval society, including nobles, farmers, clergy, and townspeople. In the famous prologue, Chaucer painted a lively and detailed picture of English life in the late Middle Ages. So this was all about Middle Ages. So I hope you would have enjoyed this lecture because it's in detail. Despite if you have any question regarding in the Middle Ages, please you can leave your comment